My son died 3 years ago. Every month I scraped together $900 from my pension to support his widow. I thought I was keeping a promise to the dead. I thought I was saving my grandson from poverty. I was wrong. One phone call from a nosy neighbor shattered my illusion. She told me to stop sending the check and look at the security footage she just emailed me. I clicked play. I saw a stranger kicking my son's dog. I saw him driving my son's truck. And I saw my money fueling a life of lies. Before I tell you how I tore their world apart piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been taken for a fool by the people you trusted most. The ink from my pen was the only thing moving in my silent kitchen. I wrote the date carefully. June 1st, then the payee, Sarah Mitchell, then the amount, $900. It was a ritual that hurt every time, but I did it anyway. That check represented my groceries for the month. It represented the heating bill I would have to delay paying. It represented the fishing trips I no longer took. But it also represented the only connection I had left to Toby. My son was gone, buried under 6 feet of Michigan soil, but his wife and his son were still here. I tore the check from the book with a sharp rip. The sound echoed in the empty house. Since my wife passed, silence was my roommate. I placed the check in an envelope. I imagined Sarah's face when she received it. She always told me how hard things were. She said she was working double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on. She said my grandson Leo needed new shoes. She said the roof was leaking. Every time we spoke on the phone, her voice was thin and tired. I believed her. I was Hank Mitchell. I was a man who believed that family takes care of family, no matter the cost. I was a fool. I reached for my coffee mug, but the landline rang. It was a jarring sound that cut through the morning calm. I looked at the caller ID. Mrs. Higgins. She was the neighbor who lived directly across the street from Sarah and Toby's house in Grand Rapids. She was 80 years old, had eyes like a hawk, and had absolutely no filter. I almost let it go to voicemail. I was not in the mood for neighborhood gossip or complaints about the garbage truck schedule. But something made me pick up. "Hank," she said. Her voice was not her usual high-pitched chatter. It was low. Serious. "Hello to you too, Mrs. Higgins," I answered, trying to keep my patience. "Don't send the check, Hank." I froze. My hand tightened around the envelope I had just sealed. "Mrs. Higgins, what are you talking about? You are a good man, Hank. You are a decent man. But you are feeding a wolf thinking it is a stray dog. I have been watching. I have been taking notes. And today I decided I could not watch anymore. I just sent an email to you. It is a video file from my front door security camera. Open it." I frowned. "Mrs. Higgins, if this is about Sarah not mowing the lawn, I really don't care. She is a single mother working 2 jobs. Cut her some slack. She is not working 2 jobs, Hank. Open the video, and then tell me if you still want to send that money." The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, the receiver humming in my ear. A cold knot formed in my stomach. It was the same feeling I had the day the police officer knocked on my door to tell me about the accident at the construction site. It was the instinct that told you your world was about to shift on its axis. I walked to my old desktop computer in the living room. It hummed to life slowly. I logged into my email. There it was, a message from Martha Higgins with a large attachment. I clicked download. The progress bar crawled across the screen. I drummed my fingers on the desk. My heart was beating a rhythm against my ribs that I did not like. Finally, the video player popped up. The timestamp was from yesterday afternoon, around 2 o'clock. The angle was wide. It showed the street, Mrs. Higgins' porch, and directly across the road, my son's house. The house I helped them buy. The house where I painted the nursery blue for Leo. The driveway was empty. Then the front door opened. I leaned in, squinting at the grainy footage. It was not Sarah. It was a man. He was tall, shirtless, wearing low-hanging basketball shorts. He scratched his stomach and yawned, stepping out onto the porch like he owned the place. I had never seen this man in my life. I felt a spike of confusion. Maybe it was a repairman? Maybe Sarah finally fixed that plumbing issue she cried about last month? Then the dog ran out. Buster. He was Toby's golden retriever, an old dog now, with gray around the muzzle. Buster was the most gentle creature on earth. He trotted up to the man, wagging his tail, looking for a pat on the head. The man did not pat him. He pulled his leg back and kicked Buster hard in the ribs. I gasped aloud in my empty living room. The dog yelped. I could hear it faintly even through the camera's microphone, and scrambled away, cowering under the porch swing. My hands balled into fists. My fingernails dug into my palms. That was Toby's dog. That dog had sat by Toby's coffin during the wake. "Get away from me, you flea bag!" the man shouted. His voice was clear. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He walked toward the garage. The garage door rumbled open. My breath caught in my throat. Inside sat the 1975 Chevy Silverado. It was black, polished chrome, pristine. Toby and I had spent 4 years restoring that truck. It was our project. It was the bond between father and son. When Toby died, I signed the title over to Sarah with one condition. I told her to keep it covered. I told her to keep it safe until Leo turned 18. It was his legacy. It was not a car. It was a memory. The stranger walked up to the truck. He opened the door and threw himself into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. He revved it hard, punishing the vintage engine that Toby had tuned with such care. He backed out of the garage fast, clipping the side of the rose bushes, Sarah's favorite roses. He did not check for traffic. He peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching, leaving black rubber marks on the pavement. The video ended. I sat in the silence. The screen went black. I stared at my own reflection in the monitor. I saw a man with gray hair and deep lines etched around his mouth. But I also saw fire in my eyes. The envelope with the check was still in my hand. I looked at it. $900. For bills, for shoes, for the struggling widow. Lies. All of it was lies. Sarah was not at work. A man was living in my son's house. A man who kicked dogs and drove my dead son's truck like it was a stolen joyride. And Sarah had never mentioned him. Not once. She had taken my money, cried on the phone about being lonely, and used my pension to play house with this lowlife. I did not feel sad. Sadness is for people who have hope. I felt something else. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a man who realizes he has been played. I felt the steel in my spine stiffen. I was a foreman on construction sites for 40 years. I knew how to deal with structural failure. You do not patch it. You tear it down to the foundation. I picked up the envelope. I did not open it. I ripped it in half. Then I ripped those halves. I shredded the check until it was nothing but confetti on my desk. I stood up. My knees popped, but I did not feel the pain. I walked to the hall closet and grabbed my coat. Then I went to the garage. I opened the toolbox. I took out a heavy tire iron. I weighed it in my hand. It was cold and solid. I did not plan to use it, but I was done being the nice, defenseless old man. I was done being the ATM machine. I walked out to my car. Grand Rapids was a 2-hour drive. I would be there by lunch. Mrs. Higgins was right. I had been feeding a wolf. But she forgot one thing. Wolves run when the hunter shows up, and the hunter was coming. I started the engine. I did not turn on the radio. I needed the silence to plan. I needed the silence to fuel the rage that was burning a hole in my chest. I was going to take back what was mine. I was going to see my grandson, and God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. The drive felt like seconds. The road blurred. All I could see was that man's foot connecting with Buster's ribs. All I could hear was the engine of Toby's truck crying out as it was abused. I pulled up to the house just as the sun was high in the sky. The driveway was empty. The truck was gone. But the front door was open. I stepped out of my car, gripping the tire iron, and walked up the path where my son used to play. I didn't knock. You don't knock on the door of a house you paid for. I pushed the door open and stepped into the cool, dark hallway. The smell hit me first. Stale beer and cigarettes. In a house where my grandson lived. "Honey, is that you?" Sarah's voice floated from the kitchen. "Did you bring the beer?" I didn't answer. I walked into the living room, and there he was. The man from the video. He was sprawled on the couch, my couch, watching a game show. He looked up, confused, then annoyed. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, not even sitting up. "I am the bank," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "and I am closing your account." The drive to Grand Rapids usually took 2 hours, but my foot was heavy on the gas pedal and the speedometer rarely dipped below 80. The road was a blur of gray asphalt and green trees, but I saw none of it. All I could see was that video on loop in my mind. The kick, the whimper, the truck peeling out of the driveway. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, matching the color of the paint on the hood. I had spent a lifetime building things, skyscrapers, bridges, homes. I knew that when a foundation was rotten, you didn't wait for the collapse. You went in and tore it down before it buried everyone inside. And right now, the foundation of my grandson's life was rotting away. I pulled up to the curb in front of the house just as the afternoon sun began to dip. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the quiet suburban street. I sat there for a moment, just breathing, trying to push the red haze of rage back from the edges of my vision. I needed to be calm. I needed to be sharp. Anger makes you sloppy, and I could not afford to be sloppy. I looked at the house. The lawn, which Toby used to manicure every Saturday morning, was knee-high in weeds. The white picket fence I had installed with my own hands was peeling, gray wood showing through like bone. A tricycle lay on its side in the middle of the walkway, rusted and forgotten. It was not just a house that was being neglected. It was a memory. Every weed, every peel of paint, felt like an insult to the man who had worked himself to the bone to pay for it. I got out of the car. The air was thick and humid. I walked up the driveway, stepping over a crushed beer can that had been tossed into the bushes. My key was still on my ring, a brass relic from a time when I was welcome here. I didn't ring the doorbell. Guests ring doorbells. Landlords and fathers inspect their property. I slid the key into the lock. It stuck for a second, stiff from disuse before turning with a heavy click. The door swung open, and the smell hit me instantly. It was a stale, sour mix of old frying oil, cigarette smoke, and something damp, like wet laundry left too long in the machine. I stepped onto the entryway rug, which was stained dark with mud. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the dim hallway. "Sarah?" There was no answer, just the murmur of a television from the living room. I walked down the hall, my work boots heavy on the hardwood floor. As I passed the kitchen, I saw a sink overflowing with dishes, plates crusted with days-old food stacked precariously high. Pizza boxes were piled on the counter, like a leaning tower of grease. This was not the home of a struggling widow working 2 jobs. This was the home of someone who had given up. I turned the corner into the living room and stopped dead. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the daylight, but the flicker of the massive television screen cast a blue glow over the room. On the sofa, the leather sofa I had bought them as a housewarming gift, lay the man. Brad. He was exactly as he appeared in the video, only now I could see the arrogance etched into his features. He was shirtless, his skin pale and slack, with a tattoo of a snake winding up his forearm. His feet were propped up on the coffee table, right next to a coaster that was being ignored. A can of cheap beer rested on his chest, rising and falling with his breathing. But what made my blood freeze was not him. It was what was behind him. On the mantel, where we had placed Toby's urn and his framed portrait from the police academy graduation, there was now a stack of video game cases and an overflowing ashtray. Toby's picture had been shoved to the far end, turned slightly toward the wall, half obscured by a half-empty bottle of liquor. He must have sensed my presence because he muted the TV and slowly turned his head. He didn't jump. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked me up and down with lazy, heavy-lidded eyes, then took a slow sip of his beer. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice scratching like sandpaper. "Sarah didn't say we were having company. You must be the old man." I took a step forward, my hands loose at my sides, ready. "Who are you?" I asked, "and why are you in my son's house?" He chuckled, a wet, ugly sound. He swung his legs off the couch and sat up, scratching his bare stomach. "I'm Brad. And this isn't your son's house anymore, Pops. It's Sarah's, which means it's pretty much mine." I felt a vein throb in my temple. "Where is she?" Brad jerked his thumb toward the back of the house. "Laundry, I think. Or maybe crying in the bathroom. She does that a lot. But hey, since you're here, you might as well make yourself useful. Did you bring the check?" We were wondering why it was late. The audacity of it took my breath away. He wasn't just a squatter. He was a parasite who felt entitled to the host's blood. "You're waiting for the check?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Yeah," Brad said, standing up. He was taller than me, but softer. He had the build of a man who had never done a hard day's labor in his life. Sarah was stressing out about the cable bill. I told her, "Don't worry, the old ATM always pays out. You're like clockwork, right?" The old ATM. That was what I was to them, not a father, not a grandfather, just a machine that spit out cash to fund their sloth. Just then, footsteps hurried down the hall. Sarah burst into the living room, wiping her saggy hands on a dirty apron. Her hair was messy, pulled back in a fraying ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She froze when she saw me. Her face went pale, then flushed a deep, shameful red. "Hank," she gasped. I didn't know you were coming." I looked at her. I looked at the woman my son had loved, the woman who had promised to honor his memory. "Sarah," I said. "Who is this?" Sarah's eyes darted between me and Brad. She looked terrified, but not of me. She was looking at him, gauging his reaction. He's a friend," she stammered. "He's renting the spare room, to help with the bills." "You know how hard it is, Hank. The roof needed fixing, and the pipes burst last winter." Brad laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Come on, babe. Don't lie to the old man. He knows. Look at him. He knows." He walked over to Sarah and draped his arm around her shoulder. She flinched, just slightly, but I saw it. He pulled her close, staking his claim. "We are more than friends, right, babe? We are soulmates." Sarah looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "Hank, please," she whispered. Just go. We can talk about this later. I'm not going anywhere, I said. I looked past them, scanning the corners of the room. Where is Leo? Oh, the kid? Brad said, waving his hand dismissively. He's around. Probably hiding. He's weird like that. Doesn't like social interaction. I pushed past them. I didn't care about their relationship. I didn't care about the lies. I needed to see my grandson. I walked toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Hey! You can't just walk in there, Brad shouted, starting to follow me. I spun around, pointing a finger directly at his chest. If you take one more step, I will introduce your face to that floorboards. Try me. He stopped. He saw something in my eyes, maybe the 40 years of hauling steel and concrete, that made him reconsider. He held up his hands in mock surrender. Okay. Tough guy. Go see the brat. I walked to the door at the end of the hall. Leo's room. The door was closed. I turned the handle gently and pushed it open. The room was dim. The blinds were pulled shut, creating a permanent twilight. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. When they did, my heart broke into 1,000 jagged pieces. Leo was sitting in the far corner of the room, wedged between the wall and his bed. He was 7 years old, but he looked 5. He was small, pale, and thin. He was wearing a t-shirt that was 2 sizes too big and stained with juice. He wasn't playing with the remote-controlled car I had sent him for Christmas. He wasn't reading the encyclopedias I had bought. He was holding a plastic action figure that was missing an arm. He was tapping it against the wall, over and over again, in a silent, rhythmic trance. "Leo," I whispered. He jumped, his eyes wide with fear. He pulled his knees up to his chest, making himself as small as possible. When he saw it was me, the fear didn't leave his eyes immediately. It lingered, like a ghost haunting a house. "Grandpa?" he asked, his voice barely a squeak. "Yes, buddy, it's me." I walked over and knelt down in front of him. The floor was sticky. There were empty candy wrappers scattered everywhere. I looked at his arm. There was a bruise, yellow and green, fading on his forearm. "What happened there, Leo?" I asked, reaching out to touch it. He pulled his arm back quickly. "Nothing. I fell. I fell off the swing." I knew that lie. It was the lie abused women and frightened children had been telling for centuries. I looked around the room. The shelves were empty. The books were gone. The expensive Lego sets I had sent? Gone. The computer I bought for his schoolwork? Gone. Then I heard a heavy footstep behind me. I stood up and turned around. Brad was leaning in the doorway watching us. He raised his wrist to check the time, and the light from the hallway caught the glint of gold. A Rolex. It might have been a fake, or maybe he pawned my son's tools to buy a real one. It didn't matter. On his wrist sat hundreds of dollars of flash, while my grandson played with broken trash in a dark room. "Nice watch," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed violence. Brad grinned, smoothing the gold band. "Yeah. Sarah got it for me. Anniversary present. 3 months. Pretty sweet, right?" I looked from the gold watch to Leo's bruised arm. I looked at the empty shelves. I looked at the fear in my grandson's eyes. And in that moment, the puzzle pieces slammed together. My $900 hadn't gone to groceries. It hadn't gone to the mortgage. It hadn't gone to Leo. Every cent I had sent, every hour of overtime I had worked in my memories, had gone to this man. It had gone to his beer, his cigarettes, his watch, and his ego. I had been funding the occupation of my own family. I turned back to Leo. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped peppermint candy, the kind I always carried for him. I pressed it into his hand. "I'll be right back, Leo," I said softly. Grandpa has to go take out the trash. I stood up and walked toward the door. Brad didn't move. He stood there, blocking my path, a smirk on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he was the alpha male in the house, the young lion pushing out the old gray wolf. Move, I said. Make me, he replied. I didn't say another word. I didn't have to. The time for words had ended the moment I saw that bruise on Leo's arm. I brushed past him, my shoulder slamming into his, hard enough to knock him off balance. He stumbled back, cursing, but I was already walking down the hall, toward the kitchen, toward Sarah. The sadness was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was a cold, calculating determination. They wanted a war? They wanted to see what the old ATM could do? Fine. They were about to find out that when you smash an ATM, you don't get money. You get crushed by the steel. I walked into the kitchen where Sarah was nervously lighting a cigarette. She looked up, her hands shaking. "Hank," she started. "I can explain." "Don't," I cut her off. My voice was calm. It was the calm of a judge delivering a death sentence. You don't have to explain anything. I see everything clearly now. I looked around the filthy kitchen. "Pack a bag for Leo," I said. "What?" Sarah dropped her cigarette. "I said pack a bag. He's coming with me." "You can't do that," Sarah shrieked. "He's my son. You can't just take him." "Watch me," I said. Brad stormed into the kitchen behind me. "Hey, you hear the lady? Get out of my house before I call the cops." "Your house?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. I looked at the calendar on the wall. I looked at the pile of unpaid bills on the counter. I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It wasn't the police, not yet. It was Mr. Steinman, my lawyer. Put it on speaker, I told myself. Let them hear the sound of their world ending. "Mr. Steinman," I said when he answered. "Hank, is everything all right?" "No," I said, staring directly into Brad's eyes. "Activate the foreclosure clause on the Mitchell property and file an emergency petition for temporary custody. Today." "Foreclosure?" Sarah whispered, her face draining of all color. Brad looked confused. "What is he talking about? What foreclosure?" I hung up the phone and smiled. It was not a nice smile. "You didn't know?" I asked Brad. "Sarah didn't tell you?" "I didn't just give them the down payment. I hold the mortgage note, and Sarah hasn't paid a dime in 6 months. I let it slide because I thought she was struggling. But now?" I leaned in close to Brad's face. I could smell the stale beer on his breath. "Now, I'm calling in the debt. You have 24 hours to get out of my property, or the sheriff does it for me." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The smirk was gone from Brad's face. Sarah began to sob, but I didn't feel a thing. The ATM was out of order. The demolition had begun. The silence in the kitchen following my phone call was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a tornado siren. I lowered the phone, the screen still glowing with the end of the call to my lawyer, and placed it deliberately on the counter next to a pile of unopened past due notices. Brad was the first to break the tension. He let out a short, nervous laugh that sounded more like a cough. He looked at Sarah, then at me, his eyes darting back and forth as he tried to reassemble his shattered confidence. "You are bluffing," he said, though his voice lacked the swagger it had in the living room. "You can't just foreclose on a house with a snap of your fingers. This is a family home. There are laws, old man. Eviction takes months, years even." I didn't look at him. I looked at Sarah. She was trembling, her hands gripping the edge of the dirty countertop so hard her knuckles were white. She looked small, defeated, and for a fleeting second, I saw the girl my son had fallen in love with. The girl who used to bake blueberry muffins on Sunday mornings. The girl who promised me with tears in her eyes at Toby's funeral that she would raise Leo to be a good man. "Sarah," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I am going to give you one chance, just one, because you are the mother of my grandson, and because Toby loved you." She looked up at me, her eyes swimming with tears and confusion. "Hank, I don't know what to do." "It is simple," I said. I pointed a finger at Brad, who was now leaning against the fridge, trying to look unbothered but failing. "He leaves. Right now. He packs his bags, he takes his fake Rolex, and he walks out that door. If he is gone in 10 minutes, I call Mr. Steinman back and put the foreclosure on hold. We sit down, we figure out a budget, and we get you help. Real help." Brad straightened up, his face flushing red. "Hey, you can't talk about me like I'm not here. Sarah, are you listening to this? He's trying to control you. He's trying to buy you." I ignored him, keeping my eyes locked on Sarah. "But if he stays," I continued, "then the process continues. The house goes, the financial support stops, and I will spend every last dime of my retirement fighting for custody of Leo. It is him or us, Sarah. Choose." The room seemed to shrink. The air grew hot and stifling. Sarah looked at me, the man who had been her father figure for a decade. Then she looked at Brad, the man who was currently draining her life dry. I waited for her to straighten her spine. I waited for her to scream at him to get out. I waited for the mother in her to wake up and protect her cub. Instead, she looked down at her feet. She took a step back, moving closer to Brad. He sensed her weakness immediately. He reached out and placed a hand on the back of her neck, squeezing it in a pion that looked possessive, almost threatening. "Sarah?" I asked, a cold stone forming in my gut. She took a deep breath and looked up. Her eyes were hard now, defensive. A wall had gone up. It was the wall of an addict protecting their supply. "You have no right," she whispered. "What?" I asked. "You have no right," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You come into my house, you insult my boyfriend, you threaten to throw us on the street? Who do you think you are? You're just a bitter old man who can't stand to see me happy." "Happy?" I gestured around the filthy kitchen. I gestured toward the dark room where Leo was hiding. "You call this happy, Sarah? My grandson is terrified. Your house is falling apart. You look like you haven't slept in a week." "That's because we're stressed about money," she yelled. "Because your $900 isn't enough anymore. And Brad loves me. He understands me. He's not like you and Toby, always judging, always expecting me to be perfect." Brad smirked, pulling her tighter against his side. "See, Hank? She chose. She chose love. She chose the future, not the past." Sarah looked at me, her chin trembling but defiant. "I need him, Hank. I need love. I can't be alone. You don't understand what it's like. Brad helps me. He supports me emotionally." "Emotionally," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Does emotional support pay the electric bill? Does emotional support fix the roof? Does emotional support justify kicking a dog and terrifying a 7-year-old boy?" "He didn't mean to," she cried, parroting the lies I knew he had fed her 1,000 times. He has a temper, but he's working on it. He loves Leo. He's a father figure to him." That broke me. Hearing her call this parasite a father figure to my son's child was the final severing of the tie. The rope snapped. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out my checkbook. I had brought it with me against my better judgment, hoping that maybe I was wrong, hoping that maybe if I saw a legitimate need, I would write one last check to help them transition. I walked over to the kitchen table. It was cluttered with junk mail and empty beer bottles. I slammed the checkbook down, the sound making both of them jump. I pulled out a pen and quickly wrote out a check. I didn't fill in the name. I just filled in the amount. $5,000. I ripped the check from the book and held it up. Brad's eyes widened. I saw the greed flash across his face like a neon sign. He actually took a step forward, his hand twitching. Sarah stopped crying, her eyes fixated on the piece of paper. "You say you need money," I said, my voice steady. "You say that's the only problem, that if you had money, everything would be fine." I looked at the check. It was more money than I lived on for 3 months. It could fix the roof. It could buy Leo clothes for a year. Or in their hands, it could buy a month of partying and a new watch. "This is what you want, isn't it?" I asked. "The ATM payout." Brad licked his lips. "Look, Hank, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. If you want to help out, we can—" I didn't let him finish. I took the check in both hands. I looked Sarah dead in the eye. "Toby worked double shifts in the freezing rain for this money," I said. "He broke his back so you would be safe. And you sold his safety for a cheap thrill with a man who abuses his son." I tore the check in half. The sound was sharp, violent. Brad gasped, as if I had physically struck him. "Hey, what are you doing?" I put the two halves together and tore them again, and again, until the check was nothing but a pile of blue and white confetti in my palm. I opened my hand and let the pieces flutter down onto the dirty linoleum floor, mixing with the dust and the dog hair. "Love will nourish you, Sarah," I said coldly. "You said you need love. Well, you have it. Let his love pay the mortgage. Let his love buy the groceries. Because from this moment on, you will not see a single penny from me. Not for a birthday. Not for Christmas. Not for an emergency. You are on your own." I turned around and walked toward the front door. I felt lighter, strangely. The burden of the last 3 years, the burden of trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved, was gone. "You're making a mistake," Sarah wailed behind me. "Hank, please. We have nowhere to go." I didn't stop. I marched down the hallway, past the living room where Toby's picture sat, turned to the wall. I reached the front door and threw it open. The fresh air hit me, cleansing the smell of stale beer from my lungs. "You'll regret this, old man." Brad's voice boomed from the kitchen. He sounded panicked now, vicious. "You think you can just walk away? You think you can threaten us?" I paused on the threshold. I didn't turn around. "You're never going to see him again," Brad screamed. "You hear me? You are never seeing Leo again. I'll make sure of it. I'll get a restraining order. I'll tell the cops you hit him. You'll die alone, you miserable old bastard." I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The slam echoed through the neighborhood. I walked down the path to my car. I could see Mrs. Higgins standing in her window across the street, watching. She gave me a small, grim nod. I nodded back. Brad's threats were still ringing in my ears. "You'll never see him again." He thought that was a winning card. He thought he could use my grandson as a hostage to force the ATM to open back up. He didn't know who he was dealing with. He thought this was a negotiation. He didn't realize that when he threatened my access to Leo, he hadn't ended the war. He had just authorized the nuclear option. I got into my car and started the engine. My hands were steady on the wheel. I didn't look back at the house. I shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb. I took my phone out and dialed Mr. Steinman again. "Do it," I said when he answered. "File the papers." "And Steinman?" Yes, Hank. Hire the private investigator. The expensive one. I want to know everything about Brad. I want to know where he was born, who he owes money to, and what he had for breakfast in 1995. I want enough dirt to bury him. Consider it done, Steinman said. I hung up. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the road. I was driving home to an empty house, but I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. The silence was where I did my best work. Brad had fired the first shot, but I was going to fire the last one. And when the smoke cleared, only one of us would be left standing in that house. The calendar on my kitchen wall became the most important tool in my war room. 30 days had passed since I walked out of my son's house. 30 days since I tore that check into confetti. 30 days of absolute radio silence. I had expected the phone to ring within the week. I expected Sarah to call, crying, begging, apologizing, telling me that Brad was gone and she needed help with the electric bill. I was ready to be generous if she showed spine. I was ready to forgive if she showed she was a mother first and a lover second. But the phone did not ring. The silence was not peaceful. It was tactical. It was the silence of an enemy digging trenches, preparing for a long siege. I did not break. I did not drive by the house to check on the lawn. I did not call Mrs. Higgins for updates, though I knew she was watching from her window like a sentinel. I stuck to my routine. I drank my coffee. I went to the hardware store. I fixed the porch steps. But every night, I stared at the empty space on the refrigerator where Leo's latest drawing should have been. The withdrawal of financial support was my weapon, but I was beginning to realize that they had a weapon too, and theirs was much more cruel. Friday afternoon arrived. Fridays were my days. For 3 years, ever since Toby died, I picked Leo up from elementary school at 3 o'clock. We would go to the park, or get ice cream, or just sit in my workshop while I taught him the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. It was the highlight of my week. It was the only time I felt the crushing weight of grief lift off my shoulders. I knew Brad had threatened me. I knew he screamed that I would never see Leo again. But I also knew the law. Or at least, I thought I did. I was the grandfather. I had a standing arrangement. And Sarah, for all her weakness, would not be cruel enough to explain to a 7-year-old why Grandpa suddenly vanished. I was wrong. I pulled my truck into the school parking lot at 2:50. The line of cars was long, parents waiting for the bell. I parked in my usual spot near the oak tree and walked toward the chain-link fence that surrounded the playground. The bell rang, a shrill sound that usually brought a smile to my face because it meant the stampede was coming. The doors burst open. A flood of children in bright colors poured out, screaming and laughing. I scanned the crowd. I was looking for the blue backpack with the superhero patch. I was looking for the messy brown hair that always needed a trim. I saw him. He was walking slowly, trailing behind the other kids. He was not running. He was not laughing. He was staring at his feet. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked toward the gate, ready to wave, ready to shout his name. "Mr. Mitchell!" a voice boomed. I stopped. A heavy hand landed on my shoulder. It was Gary, the school security guard. I had known Gary for years. We talked about football every Friday. We traded stories about our bad knees. But today, Gary was not smiling. He was not looking at me like a friend. He was looking at me like I was a threat. "Gary," I said, forcing a smile. "Good to see you. Just here for the kid." "You can't go in there, Hank," Gary said. His voice was low, apologetic, but firm. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "It is Friday. I always pick up Leo on Fridays." "Not anymore," Gary sighed. He pulled a clipboard from under his arm. He flipped a page and pointed to a highlighted line. "Sarah came in yesterday morning. She filed a new authorization form. She removed your name, Hank. You are not on the approved pickup list. In fact, she put a specific note here. Do not release child to Henry Mitchell under any circumstances. The words hit me harder than a physical blow. Removed. Banned. I looked at the paper. I recognized Sarah's handwriting. It was shaky, jagged. I could almost see Brad standing over her shoulder, dictating the words, guiding her hand with his venom. Gary, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. You know me. You know I have picked him up every week for 3 years. This is a mistake. It is not a mistake, Hank, Gary said, stepping in front of me to block the gate. It is a legal document. If I let you take him, I lose my job. And if you try to force it, I have to call the police. Don't make me do that, Hank, please. Go home. I looked past Gary's shoulder. Leo was standing by the slide now. He had stopped walking. He was looking at the gate. He saw me. My breath caught in my throat. He looked terrible. Even from this distance, I could see the dark circles under his eyes. His clothes, usually clean and pressed, looked rumpled and too big, as if he was wearing the same outfit for 3 days straight. He looked small, defeated. He looked like a prisoner of war in a playground. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just stood there, gripping the strap of his backpack with both hands. Then he moved his hand. It was a small movement. Subtle. If you didn't know what to look for, you would miss it. He brought his right hand up to his chest, made a fist, and then tucked his thumb inside his fingers. The turtle shell. It was a game we played when he was 4. When the world got too loud, or when he was scared of a thunderstorm, I told him to make the turtle shell. It meant I am scared. I need to hide. I need protection. It was our code, our secret language. He held the fist against his heart for 3 seconds, staring straight at me. Then he dropped his hand as a teacher walked by. The message was clear. It was not just a greeting. It was an SOS. My blood boiled. The urge to shove Gary aside, rip the gate off its hinges, and grab my grandson was so strong it made my vision blur. I wanted to storm that playground and carry him to safety. I wanted to drive to that house and tear Brad apart with my bare hands. But I froze. I saw the camera on the corner of the school building. I saw the other parents watching. I saw Gary's hand resting near his radio. If I made a scene, I would be the aggressor. If I yelled, I would be the unstable old man. If I fought, I would be the violent grandfather. That was exactly what Brad wanted. He was baiting me. He wanted me to explode so he could get that restraining order he threatened. He wanted legal proof that I was dangerous. I took a deep breath. It tasted like metal and exhaust fumes. I forced my hands to unclench. I looked at Leo one last time. I nodded, just once. A slow, deliberate nod. I see you. I hear you. I am coming. I turned my back on the gate. I'm leaving, Gary, I said, my voice cold as ice. I walked back to my truck. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through wet concrete. Every step away from that boy felt like a betrayal, but I knew that running back would be a suicide mission. I got into the truck and slammed the door. I didn't go home. I didn't go to the bar to drown the pain. I put the truck in gear and drove toward downtown. I drove straight to the Glass and Steel building on 4th Street, the law firm of Steinman and Associates. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't care. I walked past the receptionist who tried to tell me Mr. Steinman was in a meeting. I walked straight to his corner office and pushed the heavy oak door open. Steinman was sitting behind his massive desk, reviewing a stack of documents. He looked up, startled, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Hank?" he said. What are you doing here? I thought we were waiting for the foreclosure notice to mature. I walked up to his desk and placed my hands flat on the polished wood. I leaned in. Change of plans, I said. Steinman took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Hank, you can't just storm in here. The law takes time. Eviction takes time. You have to be patient. I'm done being patient, I said, and I am done with the eviction strategy. Steinman frowned. What do you mean? You want to drop the lawsuit? You want to give them the house? No, I said. Keep the foreclosure. Burn the house down for all I care. But that is just the opening act. I want to file a new suit. Today. Steinman leaned back in his chair, studying my face. He saw the vein throbbing in my forehead. He saw the look in my eyes that said I had nothing left to lose. What kind of suit, Hank? Custody, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Steinman sighed. He shook his head slowly. Hank, listen to me. I am your lawyer, but I am also your friend. Custody is a nightmare. You are the grandfather. The courts favor the mother. Always. Unless she is a drug addict or in prison, the biological mother holds all the cards. You are 67 years old. A judge will look at you and see a retiree. They will look at Sarah and see a grieving young widow trying her best. You will spend $50,000 and 2 years of your life, and you will likely lose. I listened to him. I heard the logic. I heard the statistics. And I didn't care. I saw him, Arthur, I said, using his first name. I saw him today through a chain-link fence. He looks like a ghost. He gave me the signal. The signal? The one he uses when he's terrified, I said. He is thin. He is dirty. And he is scared. This isn't about money anymore. This isn't about teaching Sarah a lesson. This is a rescue mission. I pulled out my wallet. I took out my credit card, the one with the high limit I saved for medical emergencies. I slammed it down on top of his legal pad. I don't care what it costs, I said. I don't care if I have to sell my truck. I don't care if I have to mortgage my own house. I am going to take that boy away from them. Steinman looked at the card. He looked at me. He saw that there was no talking me out of this. He saw that the man standing in front of him was not a client asking for advice, but a soldier asking for ammunition. He slowly picked up the card. He opened his drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad. He clicked his pen. Okay, Hank, he said. If we are going to do this, we need more than a signal. We need proof. We need dirt. We need to prove that Sarah is unfit and that Brad is a danger. The foreclosure is good leverage, but it's not enough. We need to go nuclear. I sat down in the leather chair opposite him. I leaned forward. I hired the private investigator you mentioned, I said. What did he find? Steinman opened a folder on his laptop. He scrolled for a moment, his face grim. He found plenty, Steinman said. But there is something else, something we didn't look for but stumbled upon. What? I asked. Steinman turned the laptop screen toward me. Brad isn't just a deadbeat, Hank. He has a record in Ohio. Domestic assault. 2 counts. And there is a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend 3 years ago. I stared at the screen. The mugshot of Brad stared back at me. He looked younger, but the sneer was the same. And Sarah? I asked. Steinman hesitated. The investigator found charges on her credit card. The one you have been paying off? Yeah? Online gambling sites, Steinman said. And liquor stores. Consistent charges. Almost daily. I sat back. The pieces were falling into place. The neglect. The desperation for money. The abuse. It's not enough, I said. A judge might say that's just bad lifestyle choices. We need a smoking gun. We need to prove he is hurting Leo. Steinman nodded. That is the hard part. Unless we catch him in the act. I remembered the camera, the baby monitor, the Lego spaceship sitting on the shelf in Leo's room. The one I saw through the open door when I was there. The one Brad didn't know about. I might have a way, I said, a cold realization dawning on me. Steinman looked at me. Hank, whatever you are thinking, if it is illegal, don't tell me. It's not illegal, I said, standing up. It's a gift. I gave Leo a toy 2 years ago, a big Lego set. It has a built-in camera feature for parents to check in. I set up the account. I have the password. Is it still active? Steinman asked. I don't know, I said. But if it is, if that camera is online, we are going to see exactly what happens in that house when the doors are closed. Go home, Hank, Steinman said, his voice sharp with urgency. Go home and log in. If you get footage, if you get one frame of him hurting that boy, we don't just win custody. We put him in handcuffs. I grabbed my hat. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out of the office and down the hall. I had a mission. The fence at the school had stopped me today, but there were no fences in the digital world. I was going to breach their walls. I was going to be the fly on the wall. And God help them if I saw what I thought I was going to see. The war had just moved from the courtroom to the living room, and they didn't even know I was watching. War is not a straight line. I learned that on construction sites when unions went on strike or when bad weather turned solid ground into a swamp. You make a plan, you pour the foundation, and then the world throws a wrench in the gears. I thought I had the upper hand. I thought cutting off the money and threatening foreclosure would force them to surrender. I thought Sarah would wake up. I was naive. I forgot that when you back a rat into a corner, it doesn't apologize. It bites. And Brad was a rat the size of a mountain lion. 2 days after I left Steinman's office, the first counterattack arrived. It didn't come with a bang or a shout. It came with a polite knock on my front door at 7 in the morning. I was drinking my coffee, black, watching the sunrise over the tool shed I had built with Toby. I opened the door to find a young man in a windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. "Henry Mitchell?" he asked, looking at his clipboard. "That is me," I said. "You have been served," he said. He thrust the envelope into my chest, turned around, and walked back to his car without another word. It was just a job to him. He didn't know he had just handed me a declaration of war. I took the envelope into the kitchen. My hands were steady, but my stomach turned over. I sliced it open with my pocket knife. I pulled out a stack of papers so thick they thumped when they hit the table. Superior Court of Michigan, Civil Division. Plaintiff, Sarah Mitchell. Defendant, Henry Mitchell. I put on my reading glasses and began to read. The words were legal jargon, cold and precise, but the meaning was clear. Sarah was suing me. The charges were absurd. Harassment, stalking, intentional infliction of emotional distress. They claimed that I had used my financial leverage to control Sarah's life. They claimed I had threatened them with physical violence during my visit. They claimed that my sudden withdrawal of support was a calculated act of malice designed to harm a grieving widow and her child. And then, the kicker. They were demanding spousal support. Not from a husband, but from a father-in-law. They argued that by supporting them for 3 years, I had created a dependency precedent, and that cutting them off without notice was a violation of an implied contract. They wanted $3,000 a month, plus legal fees, plus $50,000 for pain and suffering. I laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that echoed in the empty kitchen. Pain and suffering. I had buried my wife. I had buried my son. I lived in a house that was too big and too quiet. And this man, this grifter with a fake Rolex, was teaching my daughter-in-law to sue me for suffering because I stopped paying for his beer. But the lawsuit was just the jab. The right hook came an hour later. I went to the hardware store downtown. It was my sanctuary. I had been buying lumber and nails at Miller's Hardware since 1985. I knew every aisle, every smell of sawdust and oil. I knew the owner, old Bob Miller, better than I knew some of my cousins. I walked in, the bell above the door chiming. Usually, Bob would shout a greeting from the back. Usually, the guys standing around the coffee pot by the paint section would wave and ask about my truck. Today, silence. The bell chimed, and every head turned. Then, just as quickly, they looked away. Bob was behind the counter. He didn't look up. He started shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. The guys by the coffee pot suddenly found the floor very interesting. I walked up to the counter. I placed a box of galvanized screws on the mat. "Morning, Bob," I said. Bob didn't meet my eyes. "Morning, Hank." "Something wrong?" I asked. The air in the store felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. Bob sighed. He looked pained. He reached under the counter and pulled out his iPad. He tapped the screen and slid it across the glass toward me. "I didn't know you were like that, Hank," Bob said quietly. "I really didn't." I looked at the screen. It was Facebook. I didn't have an account, but I knew what it was. It was a post from Sarah Mitchell. But the words were not Sarah's. They were too polished, too manipulative. They were Brad's words coming out of her mouth. The post had a picture of Sarah, looking tearful, holding a black and white photo of Toby. Next to it was a picture of Leo, looking sad in his room. "I never thought I would have to do this," the caption read. "But I am desperate. My late husband's father, a man we trusted, has turned into a monster. After years of controlling us, yesterday he broke into our home. He threatened us. He destroyed our property. And in a fit of rage, he cut off all financial support for his own grandson just because I tried to move on and find happiness. We have no food in the fridge. We are facing eviction next week. Please, if you have a heart, help us fight this tyrant. We just want to survive." Below the text was a link to a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Sarah and Leo Escape Abuse." It had been up for 12 hours. It already had $2,000 in donations. But it was the comments that made my blood run cold. Hundreds of them. Strangers from all over the town. People I had built houses for. People I had shared beers with. Disgusting old man. Someone should teach him a lesson. Call the police on him. This is why you can't trust anyone over 60. They go senile and mean. I felt a wave of nausea. I had spent 67 years building a reputation. I was the man you called when your basement flooded at midnight. I was the man who plowed the church parking lot for free when it snowed. And in one night, with one click, a stranger with a smartphone had turned me into a villain. I pushed the iPad back to Bob. My hand was trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so hot it felt like it could melt the glass counter. "You believe this, Bob?" I asked. "You believe I would let my grandson starve?" Bob looked uncomfortable. "I don't know what to believe, Hank. Sarah is a sweet girl, and that photo of the kid, it looks bad. Maybe you should just pay them. Keep the peace, that was what everyone wanted. Just pay the extortionist. Just feed the alligator so it eats you last." I left the screws on the counter. I didn't say another word. I walked out of the store. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I could feel the whispers starting up again before the door even closed. I got into my truck. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't know. "Watch your back, Grandpa. The whole town knows who you are now." I drove. I didn't go home. I went straight to Steinman's office. I didn't wait for the receptionist. I threw the lawsuit papers on his desk. Then I threw my phone down next to it, with the GoFundMe page open. Steinman picked up the phone. He read the post. His face went gray. "Hank, this is bad," he said. "This is a PR nightmare. In a custody battle, perception is reality. If the judge sees this, if the community turns against you, they are winning the court of public opinion," I said, pacing the small office. "They are using my silence against me. They are using my dignity against me." Steinman took off his glasses. "We need to issue a statement," he said. "We need to deny the allegations. We need to explain that the money was for Leo, not for her boyfriend. We need to play defense." "No," I said. I stopped pacing. I looked out the window at the city below, the city I helped build. "No defense," I said. "Hank, you can't just ignore this. They are destroying you." "Let them," I said. I turned back to him. "Let them think they have won. Let Brad think he is a genius. Let him spend that donation money on booze and pills. Let him get comfortable." I pointed at the lawsuit on the desk. "They want to sue me for harassment? Fine. They want to claim I am a danger? Fine. They want to play dirty?" I looked at Steinman, and for the first time in a month, I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. "Steinman, do you know the first rule of working on a high-rise?" "No," he said. "You never look down," I said. "You look at the steel in front of you. You focus on the job." I leaned over the desk. "They want to drag this into the mud. They think I will be scared of a little dirt. They forgot that I worked in the mud for 40 years. I don't care about the neighbors. I don't care about Facebook. I care about the truth." I tapped the file folder where we had the investigator's report on Brad's criminal record. "You said Brad has a record in Ohio?" "Yes. And we are waiting for the camera footage from the Lego set?" "We are trying to access the server now," Steinman said. "It might take a few days to crack the old password reset." "Good," I said. "Let them have their fun for a few days. Let them spend that GoFundMe money. Because when we walk into that courtroom, I am not going to sue them for libel. I am going to destroy them with facts. I want you to file a response to this lawsuit," I said. "Okay," Steinman said, picking up his pen. "What is our plea?" "We don't plea," I said. "We countersue. Not for money. I don't want their money. I want full, legal, permanent custody of Leo Mitchell based on immediate danger and criminal negligence. And I want a subpoena for Brad's bank records. I want to show the judge exactly where that $2,000 from the kind-hearted donors went." Steinman paused. "That is aggressive, Hank. That is the law of the jungle," I cut him off. "They started this in the wild. They wanted to be animals. Well, the lion is awake now, and the lion is hungry." I picked up my hat. "Get that camera working, Steinman. I have a feeling that while Brad is busy celebrating his victory on Facebook, he is getting sloppy at home. And when he slips, I will be there to catch him." I walked out of the office. The whispers in the town didn't matter anymore. The dirty looks didn't matter. I had a target. I had a mission. And I knew something they didn't. Lies scream for attention. The truth just waits. And I was very good at waiting. The coffee in the styrofoam cup had gone cold, but I didn't care. I was sitting in the back booth of a diner on the edge of town, across from a man who made a living digging up the secrets people tried desperately to bury. His name was Reynolds. He was a private investigator my lawyer, Steinman, had used for 20 years. He didn't look like a TV detective. He looked like a retired accountant who hadn't slept in a week. He wore a rumpled suit and smelled faintly of menthol cigarettes. Reynolds didn't say hello. He just reached into his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the greasy table. The sound of the paper sliding against the formica sounded like a guillotine blade dropping. "You are not going to like this, Hank," Reynolds said, his voice raspy. "I didn't hire you to tell me fairy tales," I said. I put my hand on the envelope. It felt heavy, heavy with betrayal. I opened it. The first photo was of Brad. It was a mugshot. He looked younger, his hair shorter, but the sneer was the same. He had a black eye in the photo. "Bradley James Sullivan," Reynolds said, reading from his notebook. 35 years old, originally from Dayton, Ohio. He moved here 6 months ago. I looked at the rap sheet attached to the photo. Assault, battery, possession with intent to distribute. "But that is just the appetizer," Reynolds continued. "Look at the second page." I flipped the page. It was a police report from 3 years ago. Domestic violence. The victim was a woman named Jessica. He had broken her jaw because she didn't give him money for a parlay bet on a football game. "He has a pattern, Hank," Reynolds said. "He finds vulnerable women, single mothers, widows, women with low self-esteem and a little bit of assets. He moves in. He isolates them from their families. He takes control of their finances. And when the money runs out, or when they try to stand up to him, he gets violent." My hand tightened on the photo until it crumpled. Sarah was not just dating a loser. She was dating a predator, a wolf who specialized in eating sheep like her. "Is he violent with kids?" I asked, the question sticking in my throat. Reynolds sighed. There were no charges involving children in Ohio. But the ex-girlfriend, Jessica, she had a 5-year-old son. She told police that Brad used to lock the boy in the closet when he cried. The image of Leo hiding in his room, making the turtle shell sign, flashed in my mind. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. "There is more," Reynolds said. He pulled out another stack of papers. These were bank statements, not Sarah's, Brad's. "I managed to get these through let's call it a creative channel," Reynolds said with a humorless smile. "Look at the transactions." I scanned the columns. Bet MGM, DraftKings, PokerStars, thousands of dollars. In one night, he had lost $4,000 on online blackjack. "Where's he getting this money?" I asked. "Brad doesn't have a job." Reynolds pointed to the deposit column. "Transfers. From Sarah Mitchell." I saw the dates. They matched the dates I sent my checks. Every time I sent $900 to feed my grandson, it was transferred to this animal's account within hours. I had been funding his gambling addiction while my grandson wore shoes with holes in them. "But that is not the worst part," Reynolds said. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "The gambling debts are huge, Hank. He owes money to some bad people. Not banks. Loan sharks. The kind of people who break legs. He is desperate. And desperate men do desperate things." He pulled out a sheaf of receipts. Pawn shop receipts. I looked at them. Gold wedding band. Engraved. My heart stopped. That was Toby's ring. Sarah had promised to keep it for Leo. Sony 65-inch TV. DeWalt power drill set. Gibson acoustic guitar. Toby's guitar. The one he played for Leo when he was a baby. The one he taught me to play country roads on. "He is selling everything," I whispered. "He is stripping the house." "He is stripping her life," Reynolds corrected. "But Hank, you need to see the last document. This is the one that is going to hurt." He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a document from the county recorder's office. It was a title search on the house. The house I bought. The house I built the deck for. I looked at the lines of text. Lien holder. First National Bank. Second. Lien holder. Quick Cash Mortgage, LLC. What is this? I asked. I hold the mortgage. There shouldn't be a bank involved. Reynolds shook his head. Look at the date. 6 months ago. Sarah took out a second mortgage, a high-interest predatory loan against the equity of the house. How? I demanded. She can't do that without my permission. I am the primary lien holder. Reynolds pointed to a signature at the bottom of a subordinate agreement. Henry Mitchell. I stared at the signature. It looked like mine, but it wasn't mine. The loop on the H was too wide. The slant was wrong. She forged my signature, I said. My voice was dangerously calm. She forged a subordination agreement, Reynolds explained. Basically, she told the bank that you agreed to let them be the first in line to get paid if the house was sold. She tricked the bank, or maybe she knew a notary who looked the other way. She pulled out $80,000 of equity, Hank. $80,000, I repeated. Where is it? Gone, Reynolds said. Brad's gambling debts. His car. That fake Rolex. It is all gone. And here is the kicker. He pointed to the red stamp at the top of the page. Notice of default. She hasn't paid the new mortgage in 3 months, Reynolds said. The bank is moving to foreclose. Not you, Hank. The bank. They are going to seize the house. They are going to auction it off on the courthouse steps next Tuesday. Next Tuesday. I slammed my fist on the table. The coffee cup jumped, spilling brown liquid onto the white paper. I sat back, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. The house. It wasn't just wood and brick. It was the place where Toby took his last breath before going to the hospital. It was the place where Leo took his first steps. I had bought that house so my family would always have a roof over their heads. I had worked double shifts, skipped vacations, driven a truck with no air conditioning for 10 years to pay for that house. And now? Now it was going to be sold to the highest bidder because a gambling addict needed chips and my daughter-in-law was too weak to stop him. It's not about the money, I said, my voice trembling. It's the legacy. That house was Leo's inheritance. That was all Toby left him. Reynolds nodded slowly. He gathered the papers and put them back in the envelope. You have enough here to put her in jail for fraud, Hank, he said. Forgery is a felony. You can send her to prison for 5 years. I looked at the diner window. A family was walking by outside, a father holding his son's hand. If I send her to prison, I said, Leo goes into foster care until the custody hearing is settled. I can't do that to him. He has lost his father. I can't take his mother away in handcuffs in front of him. Then what are you going to do? Reynolds asked. The auction is in 4 days. You can't stop a bank foreclosure that fast, not with a forged document. It takes months to unravel fraud. I took the envelope. I stood up. I threw a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. I am not going to stop the auction, I said. Reynolds looked confused. What? You are just going to let them take it? No, I said. I am going to let the bank think they are taking it. I am going to let Brad think he got away with it. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think the old man is defeated. I put my hat on. But I need you to do one more thing for me, Reynolds. Name it. I need you to find out which auction house is handling the sale. And I need you to get me a seat in the front row. You are going to buy it back? Reynolds asked. Hank, that will cost you everything. Your retirement, your savings. I looked at the investigator. He saw a tired old man in a cheap suit. He didn't see the father who had buried a son. He didn't understand that money was just paper, but a promise to the dead was written in stone. It's only money, Reynolds, I said. I can make more money, but I can't make another childhood for Leo. I walked out of the diner. The sun was shining, but my world was dark. Sarah had committed a crime. She had stolen from me. She had stolen from her own son. She had chosen a monster over her family. The pain was a physical weight in my chest. It was a grief sharper than the day Toby died, because this wasn't an accident. This was a choice. She had chosen to burn our memories to keep Brad warm. I got into my truck and threw the envelope on the passenger seat. I looked at the mugshot of Brad one last time. "Enjoy your winnings, Brad," I muttered. "Because the house always wins, and this time I am the house." I started the engine. I had 4 days to liquidate my assets, 4 days to cash out my 401k, 4 days to prepare for the most expensive purchase of my life. But I wasn't just buying a house. I was buying the evidence. When I walked into that courtroom, I wouldn't just be the grandfather. I would be the landlord, the victim of fraud, and the savior, all rolled into one. I drove toward the bank. My hands were steady. The time for sadness was over. It was time for business. And business was about to get very ugly for Mr. Bradley Sullivan. The drive back from the diner felt longer than usual. The investigator's report was burning a hole in the passenger seat, but it was the hopelessness that weighed down the truck. I had the financial records. I knew Brad was a crook. I knew Sarah was a fraud. But none of that proved my grandson was in immediate physical danger. The law is a cold machine. It deals in facts, not feelings. To a judge, a gambling addiction is a bad habit, not a reason to strip a mother of her child. I needed a smoking gun, and all I had was a pile of receipts. I pulled into my driveway and walked into my empty house. I went straight to the room I kept for Leo. It was a museum of a happier time. There were the fishing rods we used last summer. There was the height chart pencil marked on the doorframe. And in the corner, there was a plastic bin full of Lego bricks. I stared at the bin. My mind drifted back 2 years. It was Leo's 5th birthday. I had wanted to give him something spectacular, something that would make his eyes go wide. I bought him the Galactic Explorer set. It was massive, 3,000 pieces. It took us a week to build. It was so big that Sarah had complained it took up the entire window seat in Leo's bedroom. The window seat. Something clicked in my brain. A memory, sharp and sudden as a lightning strike. I remembered the day we finished building it. Leo had been going through a phase of night terrors. He was afraid of the dark. He was afraid of monsters under the bed. Sarah was exhausted, sleeping through his cries. So, being the grandfather who couldn't stand to see him scared, I had improvised. I had bought a high-end baby monitor, not the cheap plastic ones. This was a security-grade camera, the kind that connects to the cloud. I had hidden it inside the cockpit of the Lego spaceship. I drilled a tiny hole for the lens. And because I didn't want Sarah to worry about changing batteries, I had rigged a small solar panel from a garden light to the top of the spaceship's wing, facing the window. It was a seamless modification. To anyone else, it looked like part of the toy. To me, it was a way to check on him if he got sick. I had never used it. I respected their privacy. I respected boundaries. But boundaries don't exist in war. I ran to my study. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sat down at my computer. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely type. I tried to remember the website. securehome.com. Yes, that was it. I typed it in. The login screen appeared. Username, Hank the Tank 1958. I remembered that. Password. My mind went blank. What was the password? I tried Leo Mitchell. Incorrect. I tried Blueberry Muffin. Incorrect. Come on, Hank, think. I closed my eyes. I pictured the day I set it up. I was sitting at this very desk. Leo was on my lap. He was laughing. "Grandpa, put the name of the boat," he had said. The boat. The fishing boat I sold when Toby died. The Sarah Jane. I typed in Sarah Jane 75. The screen loaded, a spinning wheel, round and round. I held my breath. It had been 2 years. The account might be deactivated. The Wi-Fi password at their house might have changed. Sarah might have thrown the Lego set in the trash. Brad might have pawned it. Connecting to device Galactic Explorer. "Please," I whispered to the empty room, "please let it be there." Status, online. Battery, 98%, solar charging. I let out a gasp that was half sob, half laugh. It was there. It was alive. The sun hitting that south-facing window had kept the little guardian awake for 2 years, waiting for its moment. I clicked View Live Feed. The screen flickered, pixelated, and then snapped into focus. I was looking at Leo's room. The angle was low, shooting from the window seat. The room was a disaster. Clothes were piled everywhere. The curtains were drawn, but enough light filtered through to see clearly. The bed was unmade, and there, sitting on the floor, was Leo. He was alone. He was holding a piece of bread. Just plain bread. He was eating it slowly, staring at the wall. He looked so small, so lonely. I reached out and touched the screen, wishing I could pull him through the monitor. Then, the door opened. Brad walked in. I recoiled. Seeing him in my house, on my screen, felt like a violation. He was wearing a tank top. He looked agitated. He was pacing back and forth. He stopped in front of Leo. "Did you eat it?" Brad asked. Leo nodded, not looking up. "Not good," Brad said. "You are lucky I let you eat." "Food costs money, Leo. And your grandpa stopped sending money. You know that, right?" Leo shrank back against the bed frame. "Grandpa loves me," he whispered. Brad laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. "No, he doesn't. If he loved you, he would pay. He hates us, Leo. He wants you to starve. That is why I have to sell your things. To buy food." "Liar," I hissed at the screen. "You liar." Brad crouched down. His face was inches from Leo's. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "Tomorrow, some people might come to talk to you. Police, social workers." Leo's eyes went wide. "If they ask you about me," Brad said, grabbing Leo's shoulder, "if they ask if I am nice to you, what do you say?" I say you are nice," Leo stammered. "And if they ask about the bruises?" Brad squeezed the shoulder. "What do you say?" "I fell," Leo said, tears welling up in his eyes. "I fell off the swing." Brad smiled. A cold, reptilian smile. "Good boy. Because if you tell them anything else, if you tell them I hit you, do you know what will happen?" Leo shook his head. "They will take your mommy away," Brad said. "They will put her in a cage, and you will go to an orphanage with strangers. You will never see mommy again. Is that what you want?" "No!" Leo cried out. "No, please!" "Then keep your mouth shut," Brad hissed. He stood up and patted Leo's head hard, like he was petting a dog he didn't like. I sat there, frozen. My blood had turned to ice. This wasn't just abuse. This was torture. He was holding a 7-year-old boy hostage with his own love for his mother. I moved the mouse to the record button. It was already recording. It had been recording on motion detection for months. I clicked on the library tab. I needed more. I needed to see what happened when the lights went down. I scrolled back to the previous night. Timestamp: 11:42 p.m. The room was dark, lit only by the hallway lights spilling in. Sarah walked in. She was wearing her waitress uniform. She looked exhausted. Brad followed her in. He was swaying. Drunk. "I need the card, Sarah," he slurred. "I don't have it, Brad," she whispered, glancing at the sleeping lump in the bed that was Leo. Hank canceled the authorized user. "It's declined." Brad grabbed her arm. "You're lying. You are holding out on me. You have cash tips. Give them to me." "Brad, please," Sarah begged. "That is for groceries. We have no milk." "I don't care about milk," Brad shouted. He shoved her. Sarah stumbled back, hitting the dresser. The noise was loud. Leo sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. "Mommy?" he asked. "Shut up!" Brad yelled at the boy. "Go back to sleep." Sarah stepped between Brad and the bed. "Don't yell at him." "Brad, you're scaring him." Brad's hand moved so fast the camera barely caught it. A backhand slap. It connected with Sarah's face with a sickening crack. She fell to the floor, holding her cheek. Leo started to scream. Brad pointed a finger at Sarah. "You get me money by tomorrow. I don't care how you do it. Steal it. Beg for it. Or I will sell this kid's bike next." He turned and kicked the Lego spaceship on his way out. The camera shook violently, the image blurring for a second before stabilizing. The video ended with Sarah sobbing on the floor, crawling over to hug Leo, who was shaking in his bed. I sat back in my chair. I was trembling. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was the adrenaline of a soldier who has just been handed the coordinates of the enemy base. I had it. I had the smoking gun. I had the confession. I had the assault. I had the psychological torture. I didn't just have grounds for custody. I had grounds for a felony indictment. I grabbed my external hard drive. I plugged it in. I started downloading everything, every clip, every second of footage from the last month. I watched the progress bar. Downloading, 10%, 20%. I picked up my phone. I dialed Steinman. It was late. He picked up on the third ring, sounding groggy. "Hank? It's midnight." "What is it?" "Don't sleep, Steinman," I said. My voice was calm, unnaturally calm. "What happened?" "I'm sending you a link," I said. "I want you to forward it to the district attorney and to the chief of police." "Hank, what did you find?" "Everything," I said. I found the truth. I watched the download finish. Download complete. I pulled the hard drive out. I held it in my hand. It was small, cold, metal, but it weighed more than the entire house. "Steinman," I said into the phone, "get the paperwork ready. We aren't waiting for the foreclosure. We aren't waiting for the auction." "What are we doing?" "We are going hunting," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at the screen one last time. Leo was asleep now, curled into a tight ball. "Sleep tight, little man," I whispered. "The cavalry is coming. And this time, we are bringing the heavy artillery." I stood up. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the cold coffee down the sink. I didn't need caffeine. The rage was fuel enough. I had 4 days until the auction, but Brad wouldn't last 4 days. He wouldn't last 24 hours. I went to the closet and pulled out my suit. The dark one. The one I wore to funerals. Because tomorrow, I was going to attend the funeral of Brad Sullivan's freedom. And I wanted to look my best when I shoveled the dirt on his grave. The conference room in Steinman's office was cold, sterilized by air conditioning and the scent of lemon polish. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, my hands folded on top of the legal pad. Underneath that pad sat the external hard drive containing the footage from the Lego spaceship. It was burning a hole in the table, demanding to be played. But I had to wait. The video proved abuse, but it didn't prove intent. To bury Brad Sullivan so deep he would never see sunlight again. I needed one more thing. I needed to prove that my grandson was nothing more to him than a bargaining chip. I needed to prove he was selling a human being. Steinman sat to my right. He was sweating. He kept checking his watch, adjusting his tie. He wasn't built for this kind of poker. He was a contract lawyer, not a shark. But today, he didn't need to be a shark. I was the shark. He was just the water I swam in. The door opened 10 minutes late. Brad walked in first. He was wearing a new leather jacket that squeaked when he moved, and he smelled like cheap cologne and arrogance. He didn't look like a man facing foreclosure. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery and was here to collect the check. Sarah followed him. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were downcast, her shoulders hunched. She was wearing a dress I recognized, one she wore to church when Toby was alive. It hung loosely on her frame now. She didn't look at me. She sat in the chair furthest from mine, as if my proximity might burn her. Brad threw himself into the leather chair opposite me. He put his feet up on the base of the table, crossing his ankles. He grinned, showing teeth that looked too white, probably whitened with the money from the GoFundMe campaign. "So," Brad said, his voice booming in the quiet room. The old man finally caved. "I told you, Sarah. I told you he would come crawling back." Steinman cleared his throat. "Mr. Sullivan, this is a settlement conference. We are here to discuss the terms of the custody arrangement and the financial disputes." "Cut the legal mumbo-jumbo, Four Eyes," Brad sneered. He pointed a finger at me. "We are here because Grandpa here realized he is losing in the court of public opinion. He realized that everyone in this town thinks he is a monster, and now he wants to make a deal before we destroy what is left of his reputation." I stayed silent. I let him talk. I let him fill the room with his ego. I needed him confident. I needed him reckless. I looked at Sarah. "Sarah," I said gently, "how is Leo?" Sarah flinched. She opened her mouth to speak, but Brad cut her off. "He is fine," Brad said. "He is great. He loves his new dad. We are a happy family, Hank. A family you are trying to wreck. But we are willing to be generous. We are willing to let you back in. For a price." Steinman pushed a paper forward. "We have prepared a visitation schedule, alternate weekends, one night a week for dinner, and shared holidays." Brad laughed. He didn't even look at the paper. He picked it up, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it over his shoulder. "That is cute," Brad said. "But you are not listening. We don't want a schedule. We want security. You cut us off, Hank. You left Sarah destitute. You caused her emotional trauma. If you want to see that kid, you need to pay for the damage you did." I leaned forward. The chair creaked. I looked him in the eye. "How much?" I asked. Brad's eyes lit up. He sat up straighter. He licked his lips. It was the look of a predator sensing blood. "50,000, he said. Sarah gasped. She looked up, shocked. "Brad?" "We didn't discuss—" "Hush, babe," Brad snapped, not looking at her. $50,000, Hank, cash or certified check. Today. You pay that and we drop the lawsuit. You pay that and you can see the kid on weekends. You don't pay? You never see him again. We move to Ohio next week. I let the silence hang in the air. $50,000. It was a ransom demand. Pure and simple. "I don't have $50,000 in cash," I said, making my voice sound tired. I sounded like the beaten old man he wanted me to be. I would have to pull from my retirement. It would take everything I have liquid. Brad shrugged. "You have a nice truck?" You have a big house, ma. Sell something. I don't care how you get it. Just get it. And if I pay, I asked, locking eyes with him. I get to see Leo? If you pay, Brad said, smiling, you get the VIP package. Steinman, I said, not breaking eye contact. Draft it. Steinman hesitated. He looked at me, then at Brad. He opened his laptop and began to type. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room. What are you typing? Brad asked, suspicious. A settlement agreement, Steinman said, his voice shaking slightly. It states that Mr. Mitchell is paying you $50,000. In exchange, you are agreeing to drop the harassment suit and grant him guaranteed visitation rights. Make sure it says non-refundable, Brad said. It is in there, Steinman said. He printed the document. The printer whirred in the corner. Steinman handed the fresh, warm paper to Brad. Brad read it. He wasn't a scholar. He skimmed the legal words, looking for the numbers. He saw the $50,000. He saw the word agreed. He didn't notice the specific phrasing Steinman and I had worked on. He didn't notice that the document explicitly linked the payment to the access. Quid pro quo. Money for the child. Where do I sign? Brad asked. Right there, Steinman pointed. Above the line that says primary custodian representative. Brad grabbed a pen. He signed his name with a flourish. He pressed hard, carving his signature into the paper. He pushed the paper toward Sarah. Sign it, babe, he ordered. Sarah looked at the paper. She looked at me. Her eyes were pleading. She knew this was wrong. She knew they were selling her son's time. But she was trapped. She was afraid of the man sitting next to her. She took the pen with a trembling hand and signed her name. Brad snatched the paper back and slid it across the table to me. There, he said. We held up our end. Now pay up, old man. I opened my checkbook. I felt a wave of nausea. Even though I knew this was a trap, the act of writing a check to this monster made my skin crawl. I wrote the date. I wrote the name Bradley Sullivan. I wrote 50,000 and 00 over 100. I tore the check out. I held it in my hand. Brad reached for it. His fingers were twitching. I pulled it back slightly. One last thing, I said. You promise you won't take him to Ohio? You promise I can see him this weekend? Yeah, I promise, Brad said, his eyes glued to the blue piece of paper. Just give me the damn money. I handed it to him. His fingers closed around the check. He let out a breath he had been holding. He looked at the check, checking the zeros, checking the signature. A look of pure, unadulterated greed washed over his face. He had won. He had beaten the grumpy old contractor. He was rich. He folded the check and put it in his breast pocket. He stood up, buttoning his squeaky leather jacket. Pleasure doing business with you, Hank, he said with a smirk. See? That wasn't so hard. Maybe we can do this again next month. He turned to leave. Sarah stood up slowly. Sit down, I said. The voice that came out of my throat was not the tired old man's voice. It was the voice of a foreman who just caught a worker stealing copper wire. It was deep, resonant, and cold as steel. Brad stopped. He turned around, confused. Excuse me, I said. Sit down, Brad. We aren't done. He laughed nervously. We have the check. We signed the paper. We are done. Come on, Sarah. Steinman, I said. Lock the door. Steinman stood up and turned the deadbolt on the heavy conference room door. The click echoed like a gunshot. Brad's smile vanished. What the hell is going on? You can't keep us here. That's kidnapping. No, I said, standing up slowly. I buttoned my suit jacket. I walked around the table until I was standing 2 feet from him. "That check in your pocket?" I said. That is not a settlement. That is evidence." Brad frowned. "What are you talking about?" I pointed to the document lying on the table. The ink was still wet. "You just signed a document acknowledging that you accepted $50,000 in exchange for granting access to a minor," I said. "You didn't sign a child support agreement. You didn't sign a family court stipulation. You signed a commercial transaction." I took a step closer. "You just sold rights to a child, Brad. In the state of Michigan, demanding money in exchange for parental access, when not mandated by a court, is defined as extortion. And because you explicitly threatened to move him out of state if I didn't pay, that is attempted kidnapping and trafficking." Brad's face went pale. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the check. "You're crazy," he stammered. "It's a gift. It's a trap," I said. "And you walked right into it with your muddy boots." Brad looked at the check, then at the document. He realized what he had done. He tried to rip the check. "Go ahead," I said. "Rip it. Steinman has already scanned the agreement to the cloud." "And the check?" "I already stopped payment on it 5 minutes before I walked into this room. That piece of paper is worthless as currency. But as evidence, it is worth 20 years in state prison." Brad lunged for the document on the table. He wanted to destroy the signature. I moved faster. I slammed my hand down on the paper, pinning it to the mahogany. I was 67, but I had spent my life swinging sledgehammers. My grip was iron. "Don't," I warned him. "Assaulting a senior citizen in a lawyer's office? You want to add that to the list?" Brad froze. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw the real Hank Mitchell. He didn't see a victim. He saw the executioner. He backed away, his hands shaking. "You set me up. This is entrapment. It is justice," I said. I turned to Sarah. She was standing by the chair, her hands covering her mouth. She was staring at Brad with wide, horrified eyes. She had finally seen it. She saw him not as her savior, not as her boyfriend, but as a man who had just sold her son for a check he couldn't even cash. "Sarah," I said, "you signed it too, but I know you were coerced. I didn't know," she whispered. "Hank, I swear." "I know," I said, "and that is why I am giving you a choice. Right now." I pointed to the hard drive on the table. "In that drive, I have video evidence of Brad hitting you. I have video of him threatening Leo. And now, I have a signed confession of extortion." I looked back at Brad. He was sweating profusely now, looking at the locked door like a trapped animal. "We are going to open that door," I said. "And there are 2 police officers waiting in the lobby. Steinman called them when you walked in." Brad's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Sarah," I said, "you can walk out of here with me, and we go get Leo. Or you can stand next to him. If you stand next to him, you go down with him. You lose Leo forever." Sarah looked at Brad. She looked at the fake Rolex on his wrist. She looked at the cruelty in his eyes that was now replaced by cowardice. She took a step away from him, then another. She walked around the table and stood behind me. "You bitch!" Brad screamed. "After everything I did for you, everything you did to her," I corrected. I picked up the hard drive. I picked up the signed extortion paper. "Steinman, open the door." Steinman unlocked the door and swung it open. 2 uniformed officers stood there, their radios crackling. "Gentlemen," I said, pointing at Brad, "that is Bradley Sullivan. I believe you have a warrant for his arrest regarding outstanding assault charges in Ohio, and I have some fresh evidence here for the district attorney that regarding child endangerment and extortion." Brad didn't fight. He didn't run. He slumped into the chair, defeated. The arrogance had drained out of him, leaving only a small, pathetic man in a noisy leather jacket. As the officers moved in to cuff him, I turned to Sarah. She was crying silently. "Let's go," I said. "We have a boy to save." I didn't look back at Brad as they read him his rights. I walked out of the office, Sarah trailing behind me like a ghost. I had spent $50,000 of invisible money to buy back my family's future. It was the best deal I had ever made. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a smell I knew well from my days as a union rep, but today it turned my stomach. I sat at the defendant's table next to Steinman. My hands were folded on the oak surface, steady and still. Across the aisle, Brad sat next to a public defender. He had shaved. He was wearing a cheap gray suit that was a size too small, straining at the shoulders. He didn't look like the man who had screamed at me in my kitchen. He looked humble. He looked like a grieving man trying to hold his family together. Sarah sat behind him on a wooden bench. She looked like a ghost. Her eyes were red-rimmed, staring at the floor. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at Brad. She was just existing, floating in a sea of confusion and fear. "All rise!" the bailiff shouted. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Vance walked in. She was a woman in her 60s with eyes that looked like they could cut glass. She didn't smile. She sat down, adjusted her robes, and looked over her reading glasses at the gathered assembly. "We are here for an emergency custody hearing regarding the minor, Leo Mitchell," she said. Her voice was dry and bored. She had seen 1,000 broken families. To her, we were just another case number, just another file on a stack of misery. Brad's lawyer stood up first. He was young, eager, and clearly believed the story Brad had spun for him. "Your Honor," he began, his voice filled with righteous indignation, "we are here because a wealthy, controlling grandfather is using his financial power to abuse a struggling widow. My client, Mr. Sullivan, has stepped up to be a father figure to young Leo. He has provided love, stability, and support. But Mr. Mitchell here, driven by grief and perhaps senility, has waged a campaign of terror against them. He cut off their food money. He threatened to foreclose on their home. He stalked them. He broke into their house. We are asking the court to grant full custody to the mother, Sarah Mitchell, and issue a permanent restraining order against the grandfather." Brad wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. He looked at the judge and nodded solemnly. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. He was playing the role of the protector, the saint who was being persecuted by the evil old man. I felt the rage rising in my chest, hot and acidic. I wanted to stand up and shout. I wanted to tell the judge about the Rolex, about the beer cans, about the fear in Leo's eyes. But Steinman placed a hand on my arm. "Wait," he whispered. "Let them dig the hole." Judge Vance looked at me. "Mr. Mitchell, these are serious accusations. You cut off financial support to a 7-year-old boy?" I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor, I did." The judge frowned. "Why?" "Because, Your Honor, I realized I wasn't funding a child. I was funding a crime." Brad's lawyer jumped up. "Objection! Conjecture!" "Sustained," the judge said. "Mr. Steinman, call your first witness." "We don't have witnesses, Your Honor," Steinman said, standing up slowly. "We have arithmetic." Steinman walked to the bench. He didn't look at Brad. He looked only at the judge. "Your Honor, the plaintiff claims that Mr. Sullivan is a provider, a stabilizer. We would like to submit Exhibit A." Steinman handed a stack of papers to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. "These are the bank records of Mr. Bradley Sullivan," Steinman said. "As you can see, in the last 6 months, over $15,000 has been transferred from Sarah Mitchell's account to his, and if you turn to page 3, you will see where that money went. Online casinos, sports betting apps, and a local pawn shop. The courtroom was silent. The only sound was the rustling of paper as Judge Vance flipped through the pages. Her brow furrowed. She looked up at Brad. Brad shifted in his seat. He whispered something to his lawyer, who looked suddenly pale. "That is irrelevant," Brad's lawyer stammered. "How Mr. Sullivan spends his own money is—" "It is not his money," Steinman cut in, his voice sharp. "It is the money meant for the child's food. It is the money meant for the mortgage. Which brings me to Exhibit B." Steinman slapped another document on the bench. "This is a subordination agreement filed with the county recorder. It allowed Sarah Mitchell to take out a high-interest second mortgage on the family home. A home Hank Mitchell holds the note on. The signature of Hank Mitchell at the bottom is a forgery. And the $80,000 from that loan? It vanished into Mr. Sullivan's gambling debts within 48 hours. The judge stopped reading. She took off her glasses. She looked at Brad. This time, there was no boredom in her eyes. There was suspicion. "Mr. Sullivan," she asked, her voice like a whip, "did you coerce Mrs. Mitchell into signing these loans?" Brad stood up. No, Your Honor. It's a lie. The old man is lying. I was trying to invest. I was trying to build a future for us." "Sit down," the judge barked. Brad sat, but he was sweating now. The confident facade was cracking. He glared at me, his eyes full of venom. Steinman walked back to the table. He looked at me and nodded. It was time. "Your Honor," Steinman said softly, "financial abuse is one thing. But we are not here about money. We are here about the safety of a child. The plaintiff claims he is a loving father figure. He claims he provides stability." Steinman pulled the external hard drive from his briefcase. He held it up. It caught the fluorescent light of the courtroom. "We would like to submit Exhibit C. This is video footage recorded from inside Leo Mitchell's bedroom." Brad's face went white. He knew. In that split second, he knew exactly what was on that drive. He started to stand up again. "Object!" he screamed. "Illegal surveillance! That's a violation of privacy! Sit down!" the bailiff shouted, moving toward him. Judge Vance looked at the drive. "What is on this, counselor?" "The truth, Your Honor," Steinman said. The judge nodded. "Play it." Steinman plugged the drive into the court's AV system. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. The courtroom went dark. And then, the image appeared. It was the low-angle shot from the Lego spaceship. The image was crisp and clear. It showed Leo sitting on the floor, looking at the door. Then Brad walked in. The audio filled the courtroom. It was loud, uncomfortably loud. "If you tell them I hit you, do you know what will happen?" Brad's voice on the recording was a menacing hiss. On the screen, Brad loomed over the boy. "They will take your mommy away. They will put her in a cage." I looked at Sarah. She was staring at the screen, her hand covering her mouth. She was trembling so hard the bench beneath her was shaking. She had never seen this. She had suspected, she had feared, but she had never seen the monster when the mask was off. The video cut to the next clip. The night scene. Sarah and Brad arguing. "I don't care about milk!" And then, the slap. The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed off the mahogany walls. It was a sickening, wet sound. In the gallery, people gasped. The court reporter stopped typing. On the screen, Sarah fell. Leo screamed. A high, piercing scream of a child watching his mother get hurt. "You get me money by tomorrow, or I will sell this kid's bike next." And then the final image. Brad kicking the Lego spaceship. The screen shook, then went black. The lights in the courtroom came back on, but the silence remained. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Brad was staring at the table, his face a mask of red fury and shame. His lawyer had moved his chair a few inches away from him. distancing himself from the toxicity. Judge Vance was not looking at the papers anymore. She was looking at Brad with an expression of pure disgust. She looked like she wanted to jump over the bench and strangle him herself. Then, a sound broke the silence. It was a wail. Low at first, then rising. It was Sarah. She had collapsed forward, her forehead resting on the wooden bench in front of her. Her shoulders heaved. It wasn't a cry for attention. It was the sound of a dam breaking. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the man she had brought into her home, the man she had defended, the man she had sued her own father-in-law for, was a devil. She looked up. Her face was wet with tears, her mascara running in black streaks. She looked at Brad. "You hurt him," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, broken. "You told me you loved him. You told me you were playing games with him." Brad turned to her, desperate. "Sarah, baby, it's out of context. That video is doctored. The old man is trying to frame me." "You hurt my baby," Sarah screamed. She lunged at him. The bailiff had to step in, holding her back. She was clawing at the air, trying to reach his eyes. "You monster! You promised me! You promised! Order!" Judge Vance banged her gavel. "Order in this court!" But there was no order. The truth had exploded like a bomb in the center of the room. The judge pointed her gavel at Brad. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice shaking with controlled anger, "you will not speak another word." She turned to me. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "the court has seen enough." She looked down at her paperwork, signing an order with a furious scratch of her pen. "Custody of Leo Mitchell is awarded to Henry Mitchell, effective immediately. A permanent restraining order is issued against Bradley Sullivan. He is to come nowhere near the child, the mother, or the grandfather." She looked up at the bailiff. "And bailiff, do not let Mr. Sullivan leave this building. I am holding him in contempt. And I strongly suggest the district attorney's office review this footage for immediate criminal charges of child endangerment, assault, and extortion." Brad stood up, panic in his eyes. "You can't do this. I have rights." "Get him out of my sight," the judge said. As the bailiff grabbed Brad's arms and clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists, I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just let out a long breath. I looked at Sarah, who was sobbing into her hands. I looked at the empty spot where the judge sat. And I felt the weight of the last 3 years lift off my shoulders. The storm had broken. The thunder had rolled. And now, finally, there was silence. But this time, it was the silence of victory. The gavel banged, and it sounded like the closing of a coffin lid on Brad Sullivan's life. The echoes bounced around the courtroom, mixing with Sarah's jagged sobbing and the murmur of the stunned gallery. I didn't move. I sat very still, feeling the vibration of justice in the wooden table beneath my hands. The judge, Honorable Evelyn Vance, was not finished. She was writing furiously on her docket, her pen scratching against the paper with violent intent. She looked up. Her eyes were hard, unblinking. "The court finds that Sarah Mitchell has failed in her duty to protect the minor child, Leo Mitchell, from clear and present danger." Sarah let out a small, strangled cry. "No, please." "Therefore," Judge Vance continued, her voice slicing through Sarah's plea, "temporary legal and physical custody of Leo Mitchell is awarded to his grandfather, Henry Mitchell, effective immediately. This order will remain in place pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services and a psychological evaluation of the mother." Brad stood up. His face was a mask of disbelief that was rapidly crumbling into rage. He looked at the judge, then at me. The handcuffs on his wrists clicked as he clenched his fists. "You can't do this," he shouted. "This is a setup. That video is fake. The old man doctored it." "Mr. Sullivan," the judge barked, One more outburst and I will add another 6 months to your sentence for contempt." "I don't care about your sentence," Brad roared. He was losing it. The facade of the caring stepfather had completely dissolved, revealing the violent thug underneath. He lunged toward the table where I sat. I didn't flinch. I watched him come. I saw the veins bulging in his neck. I saw the spittle flying from his lips. 2 bailiffs were on him instantly. They grabbed him by the arms, dragging him back. He struggled, kicking at the air, his shoes scuffing loudly on the polished floor. "I am going to kill you, old man," Brad screamed, his voice raw and ugly. "You hear me? I will burn your house down. I will burn everything you love." The courtroom gasped. The threat was so visceral, so public. The judge stood up, her face pale with fury. "That is a threat on the record, Mr. Sullivan. Bailiffs, remove him, now!" As they dragged him past my table, he was still fighting, still screaming. He looked at me with eyes that promised murder. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I walked 2 steps toward the aisle so I was right next to him as the officers struggled to push him toward the side door. He stopped struggling for a second, just to glare at me. "You're dead, Hank! You're dead!" I leaned in close enough to smell the fear sweat that was breaking out under his cheap cologne. I looked him dead in the eye. "You won't burn anything, Brad," I whispered. My voice was low, for his ears only. "Why?" he hissed. "Because they don't let you have matches in prison," I said. His eyes went wide. The realization hit him. The assault charges, the extortion, the child endangerment, the threats in open court. He wasn't going home. He wasn't going to Ohio. He was going to a cell for a very, very long time. The bailiffs shoved him through the door. His screams of rage were cut off as the heavy wood slammed shut. Silence returned to the courtroom. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence after a storm passes, when the air is clean but the wreckage is visible. I turned to Sarah. She was still sitting on the bench, her head in her hands. She looked broken. Judge Vance looked at me. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice softer now. "The bailiff will escort you to the school to pick up your grandson. A social worker will meet you at your residence this evening to inspect the home environment." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. "And Mr. Mitchell?" "Yes, Your Honor?" "Thank you for paying attention," she said. "Too many people look the other way." I nodded. I didn't feel proud. I felt relieved, but also deeply sad. I gathered my papers. Steinman was beaming, shaking hands with the court clerk, already talking about filing the civil suit for damages. I ignored him. I didn't care about damages. I cared about the little boy waiting by the school gate. I walked over to Sarah. She didn't look up. "Sarah," I said. She flinched. She looked up at me, her face a ruin of tears and mascara. "I am sorry, Hank," she whispered. "I am so sorry." I didn't know. I mean, I knew he was rough, but I didn't know he was. "You chose him, Sarah," I said. I wasn't being cruel. I was stating a fact. You chose him over Leo, and that is something you are going to have to live with. "Please," she begged, grabbing my sleeve. "Let me see him. Let me explain to him." "No," I said, pulling my arm away gently but firmly. "Not today. Not for a while. You need help, Sarah. You need to figure out why you let a wolf into the sheep pen. Until you fix that broken part of yourself, you are dangerous to him." I walked away. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The strangers in the gallery, the ones who had probably read the Facebook posts, the ones who had judged me, watched me go. Some of them nodded respectfully. Others looked away in shame. I didn't care about their approval any more than I cared about their scorn. I walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I got into my truck. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My hands were shaking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I was 67 years old. I was too old for this. I should be fishing. I should be napping in my recliner. Instead, I was starting over as a father. But then I thought of the turtle shell signal. I thought of the bruise on Leo's arm. I started the engine. The truck roared to life, a strong, reliable sound. I drove to the school. I pulled up to the gate. Gary, the security guard, was there. He looked nervous. He had probably heard about the court order already. I got out of the truck. I held up the paper the judge had given me. The court order with the gold seal. Gary took it. He read it. He let out a long sigh. "I am glad, Hank," he said. He handed the paper back. "I really am." "Open the gate, Gary," I said. He buzzed the lock. I walked onto the playground. It was recess again. The kids were running, screaming, playing tag. I scanned the crowd. I found him. He was sitting on a bench by himself, away from the other kids. He was looking at his shoes. He looked like he was waiting for the end of the world. I walked up to him. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, casting a shadow over him. He looked up. His eyes widened. He looked past me, looking for Brad, looking for the threat. "It's just me, Leo," I said. Where is he?" Leo whispered. "He is gone," I said. "Gone?" I sat down next to him on the bench. I put my arm around his small shoulders. He flinched at first, then relaxed, leaning into my side. "He is gone, Leo. The police took him away. He can never come back. He can never hurt you again. And he can never hurt your mommy again." Leo looked at me. His lower lip trembled. "Really, really," I said. "I promised." "Is mommy coming?" he asked. "Not today," I said. Mommy is sick. Not a tummy ache sick, a heart sick. She needs to go to a special doctor to get better. So for a while you are going to come stay with Grandpa. In the big house with the workshop and the fishing rods." Leo stared at me. He was processing it. The fear was slowly leaving his eyes, replaced by a fragile hope. "Can we build the spaceship?" he asked. "The big one?" I smiled. It was the first real smile I had felt in months. "We can build anything you want, kiddo," I said. "We can build a whole fleet." I stood up and held out my hand. "Come on. Let's go home." He took my hand. His grip was small but strong. We walked out of the playground together. I didn't look back at the school. I didn't look back at the courthouse. I looked forward. The road ahead was going to be hard. I was an old man raising a young boy. There would be homework I didn't understand. There would be questions about his father I couldn't answer. There would be nights when he cried for his mother. But we would figure it out. We would rebuild. Just like I taught him with the Legos. You take the broken pieces and you snap them back together, one by one, until you have something new, something stronger. As we got to the truck, Leo looked up at me. "Grandpa? Yeah? Did you use the turtle shell?" I looked down at him. I squeezed his hand. "Yeah, Leo. I used the turtle shell, and then I used the tire iron." He didn't understand the joke, but he smiled anyway. I lifted him into the truck. I buckled him in. I closed the door. Safe. Finally safe. I walked around to the driver's side. I looked at the sky. It was a clear, brilliant blue. "Thank you, Toby," I whispered. I got in and drove us home. The days following the trial were a blur of paperwork, social workers, and moving boxes. But for the first time in 3 years, the blur wasn't caused by tears or rage. It was the frantic, exhausting, beautiful chaos of rebuilding a life. I drove to the house, the one I had bought for Toby, the one Brad had turned into a prison. The for sale sign was already planted in the front lawn, but not by the bank. By me. I had paid off the arrears. I had cleared the fraudulent second mortgage using my retirement savings. It had cost me nearly everything I had in the bank, but I didn't care. I owned the bricks again, and my first act as owner was to purge it. I walked through the empty rooms. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't threatening anymore. It was just empty. I walked into the living room where Toby's picture used to hang. I walked into the kitchen where I had torn the check. I walked into Leo's room. I stood there for a long time. The spot where the Lego spaceship had been was empty. The carpet still had the indentation of the bed where Leo had huddled in fear. "This house is not a home," I whispered to the walls. "It's a crime scene." I couldn't let Leo grow up here. Every corner held a ghost. Every creak of the floorboards would remind him of Brad's footsteps. A home should be a sanctuary, not a museum of trauma. So I made the call. I listed it. I sold it to a young couple from out of state who didn't know the history, who didn't know about the screams that had echoed in the hallway. They saw a fixer-upper with good bones. I saw a tomb I needed to seal. The money from the sale didn't go into my pocket. I took every cent of the profit, after paying back my own retirement fund, and I opened a new account. A trust fund. The Leo Mitchell Future Fund. And then I did something else. I set up an automatic transfer. $900 every month. It was the same amount I used to send Sarah. But this time, it wasn't going into a black hole of deception. It was going into a fortress for my grandson's future. By the time he turned 18, he would have enough for college, or to start a business, or to buy a house of his own, a house where no one would ever be allowed to hurt him. Sarah didn't argue about the house. She didn't argue about anything anymore. The court had mandated intense therapy and parenting classes as a condition for any future unsupervised visitation. She was living in a small studio apartment now, working a single job, trying to find out who she was when she wasn't being defined by a man. I saw her sometimes, at the supervised visits at the community center. She looked tired, but clearer. The heavy makeup was gone. The frantic desperation was gone. She would sit with Leo and play board games, and sometimes I would catch her looking at me with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She knew I had destroyed her life, but she also knew I had saved her son. It was a complicated piece, but it was peace. Leo adjusted to life in my house faster than I expected. Kids are resilient, they say. I don't know if that's true, or if they just learn to hide things better than adults. But day by day, the shadows under his eyes faded. He put on weight. He started laughing again, a real belly-shaking laugh that sounded just like Toby's. One evening I found him in my workshop. He was holding a piece of scrap wood and a sanding block. "What you doing, sport?" I asked. "Making a boat," he said, not looking up. "Like the Sarah Jane." I felt a lump in my throat. I sat down next to him. "You need to sand with the grain, Leo," I said gently. "Like this." I took his small hand in mine and guided the block, back and forth, smooth and steady. "Grandpa?" he asked after a while. "Yeah? Why did Brad want to hurt us?" The question hung in the air, smelling of sawdust and old oil. I could have lied. I could have told him Brad was just a bad man, a monster. But I had promised myself no more lies. "Because he was broken, Leo," I said. "Some people are like houses built on sand. They look okay from the outside, but inside they are crumbling, And when they start to fall, they grab onto anything they can to stay up, even if it hurts the people they grab. Leo stopped sanding. He looked at the wood. "Am I broken?" he asked in a small voice. I turned him around so he was facing me. I looked into those eyes that were so much like his father's. "No," I said fiercely. "You are not broken. You have a few dents. We all do. I have dents. Your dad had dents. But you are made of strong stuff, Leo. You are made of oak and steel. You might get scratched, but you won't break." He nodded, satisfied. He went back to sanding. I watched him work. I thought about the $900 accumulating in the bank. I thought about the empty house I had sold. I thought about Brad sitting in a cell, probably blaming everyone but himself. Justice isn't a gavel banging. It isn't a police siren. Justice is this. It is the sound of sandpaper on wood. It is a boy feeling safe enough to turn his back to the door. It is the quiet, boring, beautiful routine of a life reclaimed. I stood up and brushed the sawdust off my pants. "Hey," I said. "You hungry?" "Yeah," Leo said. "Can we have pizza?" "We can have whatever you want," I said. We walked into the kitchen. The house felt full. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of peace. I looked at the calendar. It was the 1st of the month. I didn't have a check to write. I didn't have an envelope to lick. Instead, I opened my laptop. I logged into the bank. I saw the transfer go through, plus $900 to Leo Mitchell Trust. I smiled. It was the best money I never spent. I closed the laptop. "Pepperoni or cheese?" I called out. "Both!" Leo shouted from the other room. "Both it is," I said. I was 67 years old. I had lost a son. I had fought a war. I had torn down a family to save a child. I was tired. My back hurt. But as I listened to my grandson singing to himself in the next room, I knew one thing for sure. I was the richest man in the world. The snow started falling around noon on Christmas Eve. It wasn't the angry driving blizzard that usually hits Michigan in December. It was a soft, steady blanket of white that covered the scars of the driveway and turned the bare trees into sculptures of ice. Inside the house, the air smelled of pine needles and wood smoke. For the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel too big. It felt full. I stood by the fireplace, adjusting the stockings. One for me. One for Leo. And a third one, smaller, hanging in the center. It was Toby's old stocking. We didn't fill it anymore, but we hung it every year. It was no longer a symbol of grief, but a salute to a fallen soldier. "Grandpa, look!" I turned around. Leo was standing on the step stool, reaching for the highest branch of the spruce tree we had cut down together at the farm last week. He was holding the silver star. He was stretching his little body, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Careful, sport," I said, taking a step forward, but letting him do it himself. He placed the star on the tip. It wobbled for a second, then settled. He jumped down, landing with a heavy thud on the hardwood floor. He was wearing new flannel pajamas and thick wool socks. He had grown 2 inches in the last year. His cheeks were pink, not from fever or crying, but from the heat of the fire and the excitement of the holiday. "We did it," he beamed. "It looks just like the picture." "It looks better," I said. I ruffled his hair. It looked better because he wasn't hiding in a dark room building spaceships to escape reality. He was standing in the light, building memories. The doorbell rang at exactly 4 o'clock. Leo froze. The smile dipped for a fraction of a second. The trauma of the doorbell, the memory of bill collectors or Brad's shouting, was fading, but it wasn't gone. It was a shadow that sometimes stretched across the floor. It is okay, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. We are expecting her. Remember? Leo nodded. Mommy, he whispered. I walked to the door. I didn't rush. I checked the peephole out of habit. A dark sedan was parked in the driveway. A woman stood on the porch. Beside her stood Mrs. Gable, the court-appointed social worker. I opened the door. A gust of cold air rushed in, swirling the snow around their boots. Merry Christmas, Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Gable said. She was a stern woman, but she had been fair to us. Come in, I said. Sarah stepped inside. She stomped the snow off her boots on the mat. I looked at her. It had been 6 months since the trial. The woman standing in my hallway was not the same woman who had sat in that courtroom. The Sarah of last year wore tight dresses and layers of foundation to hide the bruises. This Sarah wore a simple wool coat and jeans. Her face was scrubbed clean, her skin pale but healthy. Her hands were red and rough. I knew why. She was working the early shift at Miller's Bakery downtown. She was kneading dough at 4 a.m. It was hard, honest work, the kind of work that cleans the soul. Hello, Hank, she said softly. Her voice was steady. She didn't look at the floor. She met my eyes. There was shame there, yes, but there was also dignity. Hello, Sarah, I said. Put your coat on the rack. She took off her coat. Underneath, she wore a red sweater. It looked like something she had knitted herself. She held a small white box tied with a green ribbon. Leo came into the hallway. He stopped a few feet away, holding his favorite ornament, a wooden soldier. Hi, Leo, Sarah said. She didn't run to him. She didn't cry and make a scene. The therapists had taught her well. She stayed in her space, letting him decide the distance. Hi, Mommy, Leo said. You look so tall, she smiled. Her eyes shimmered, but she held the tears back. I brought you something. It isn't much. I made them at the shop. She held out the box. Leo stepped forward and took it. He opened the lid. Inside were 6 gingerbread men, decorated with clumsy but colorful icing. I put extra gumdrops on the buttons, just how you like them, she said. Leo smiled. Thanks, Mommy. Do you want to see the tree? I would love to, she said. They walked into the living room. Mrs. Gable stood by the doorway, leaning against the wall, watching. I stood next to her. We were the sentinels. We were the guards, ensuring the peace was kept. I watched Sarah sit on the floor next to Leo. She didn't try to hug him until he leaned against her. They talked about school. They talked about the snow. She told him about the bakery, about how the flour got everywhere and made her look like a ghost. Leo laughed. It was a normal conversation, and that was the miracle. After the screaming, the police, the fear, and the betrayal, we had clawed our way back to normal. Brad Sullivan was currently serving the first year of a 12-year sentence in a state penitentiary. The charges had piled up: extortion, assault, fraud. He had tried to write to Sarah once. I intercepted the letter. I burned it in the fireplace without opening it. Some ghosts don't deserve to be heard. After an hour, Mrs. Gable checked her watch. It is time, Sarah. Sarah nodded. She didn't argue. She knew the rules. She stood up. She hugged Leo tight, burying her face in his neck for just a moment longer than necessary. Be good for Grandpa, she said. I will, Leo said. Merry Christmas, Mommy. Merry Christmas, baby. She walked back to the hallway. She put on her coat. She turned to me. Mrs. Gable stepped out onto the porch to give us a second of privacy. Hank, Sarah said. I waited. I wanted to thank you, she said. I looked at her. For what? For taking your son? For selling your house? No, she said. For stopping me. If you hadn't cut off the money, if you hadn't called the police, I don't know where we would be. Brad would have killed me. Or he would have hurt Leo worse. She buttoned her coat, her fingers trembling slightly. I hated you for a long time, she admitted. I thought you were cruel. I thought you were a miser. But you weren't punishing me. You were waking me up. It took losing everything to realize I had nothing to begin with. You have a job now, I said. You have your sobriety. You have a chance. That isn't nothing. No, she smiled, a sad, small smile. It isn't nothing. It is a start. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I know it isn't much, she said, but I want you to have this. It's the first installment. I want to pay you back, for the legal fees, for the second mortgage. I know it will take me the rest of my life, but I am going to pay back every cent you spent cleaning up my mess. I took the envelope. I could feel the thinness of it. Maybe $50, maybe $100. It didn't matter. It was the first money Sarah had ever given me. It was the first money she had earned with her own sweat that wasn't going to a man who despised her. Keep it, I said. Hank, please. Put it in a savings account, I said. For him. I nodded toward the living room where Leo was eating a gingerbread man. I don't need your money, Sarah. I need you to be strong. That is how you pay me back. Be the mother he deserves. That is the only currency I accept. Sarah looked at me. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. I will, she whispered. I promise. She opened the door and stepped out into the night. The snow was falling harder now. I watched her walk to the car. She walked straighter than she used to. She didn't look back. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. The solid thunk of the metal was the most comforting sound in the world. I walked back into the living room. Leo was lying on the rug, staring at the lights on the tree. Is she coming back? He asked. Not tonight, I said. But she will be back. She is getting better, Leo. Slowly. I sat down in my leather armchair. The fire crackled, popping and spitting sparks against the metal screen. I looked at the envelope in my hand. I placed it on the mantelpiece next to the picture of Toby. I looked out the window. The world was white and silent. It was a cold world out there. A world full of Brad Sullivans. A world full of addiction, greed, and people looking for an easy victim. I thought about the last year. I thought about the money I had spent. The retirement fund was gone. The easy years of fishing and sleeping late were gone. I was back to working part-time consulting on construction bids just to keep the trust fund growing. People told me I was a hero. They commented on the news articles. They praised the grandfather of the year. They didn't understand. I wasn't a hero. I was a mechanic. The machine was broken, and I fixed it. I looked at Leo. He was safe. He was warm. He was eating sugar and waiting for Santa Claus. He didn't know about the lawyers. He didn't know about the threats. He didn't know that his grandfather slept with a baseball bat under the bed for 3 months, and he didn't need to know. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black and bitter, just the way I liked it. Money can buy comfort, I thought. It can buy a big house. It can buy a fast car. It can buy a fake Rolex to impress strangers. But money is soft. It burns. It gets stolen. Strictness, discipline, the willingness to be the bad guy to save the people you love, that buys the future. That buys life. My son was dead. I couldn't bring him back. No amount of begging or bargaining would open that grave. But his blood was right there, lying on my rug, covered in cookie crumbs. That was the victory. That was the legacy. I wasn't raising a grandson. I was raising a man. I was raising someone who would know the value of $1, the value of a promise, and the difference between a wolf and a sheepdog. Leo yawned, stretching his arms over his head. "Grandpa?" he murmured, his eyes heavy. "Yeah, buddy. Can we build the castle tomorrow? The one with the drawbridge?" I smiled. "The drawbridge. The defense." "Yeah," I said. "We will build the castle, and we will build the walls thick." I stood up and scooped him into my arms. He was getting heavy, but I could still carry him. I would carry him until my legs gave out. I carried him up the stairs, past the pictures of his father, to his warm, safe room. I tucked him in. I checked the window. It was locked. I checked the baby monitor on the shelf, the old Lego spaceship. It was unplugged now. We didn't need cameras anymore. We had the truth. I turned off the light, leaving the door cracked open just enough to let the hallway light in. "Good night, Hank," I whispered to myself. I walked back downstairs to sit by the fire. The snow kept falling, burying the world in white. Let it snow. Let the cold come. Inside this house, the fire was lit. The wolf was in a cage, and the shepherd was awake. And that, finally, was enough. This story taught me that being a provider isn't just about writing checks. It's about providing safety, truth, and boundaries. I used to think that keeping the peace meant ignoring the cracks in the foundation, but I learned that sometimes you have to tear the whole house down to save the people inside. True family isn't defined by who sits at your table on Thanksgiving, but by who will stand in front of you when the wolves come. If you are protecting someone you love, don't apologize for being the villain in someone else's story. Your strength is their shield. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have stopped the money sooner or tried to talk to Sarah first? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and resilience. See you in the next one.